exactly who was in the county and state's emergency operations centers during the disaster, and what time those leaders made the call to bring all hands on deck.
These are simple questions. Who was there and what time were these emergency operations centers fully activated? We finally got an answer from the state, and an expert says it suggests a critical delay that likely impacted government's response to the disaster. 911 calls started pouring in at 3:30 the afternoon of August 8th.
And people are going to die here if you don't make sure that that intersection is going to flow.
Meanwhile, officials in charge of heading up both the county and state's emergency response seemed oblivious to the severity of the situation unfolding on the ground. At the same time, people were jumping into the ocean to escape flames. Mayor Richard Bisson said this on the 6 o'clock news.
I'm happy to report that the road is open to and from Lahaina.
Then about 10 that evening, 7 hours after the wildfire sparked, Acting Governor Sylvia Luke and the head of the state's emergency management agency, Major General Kenneth Hara, did this interview with H&N Investigates, seemingly unaware the town had already been leveled.
Were we ready for this scenario? It doesn't seem like anyone envisioned this.
Actually, we were ready. So we were preparing for this in coordination with the county. So I really want to give credit to the National Weather Service.
That string of apparently uninformed statements prompted H&N Investigates to submit public records requests asking for sign-in sheets listing who was in the county and state emergency operations center the day of the fire. Nearly 2 months later, we're still waiting from a response from Maui County. After many weeks and pressure from the Office of Information Practices, a spokesperson from the state told us no record is available because the state EOC was not fully activated on August 8th, the day the Lahaina fire started, and no sign-in sheet was maintained. In a follow-up email, a spokesperson told us numerous state emergency support functions were activated on August 9th, the day after the disaster, and that a full activation started at 6 a.m. on August 10th. When we asked Major General Hara why it took so long, the story changed. The state now claims a top Hawaii emergency management official, Administrator James Barros, ordered a full activation late on August 8th, and that personnel reported for duty started the following morning, but wouldn't give us specific times. When we asked for an interview, we were told Hara is currently on leave and that no one else is available. Even with the modified timeline, an emergency management expert with 40 years experience told H&N Investigates the delay is hard to explain.
I'd want to know why. That would be atypical for HIEMA. They usually are very aware of what's going on.
Over the years, Toby Claremont has worked at the city, state, and federal levels and had a hand in coordinating emergency response to disasters like Hurricane Katrina. He also served as the executive officer at the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency before retiring in 2018. Claremont says in a disaster, the most essential resources are activated by the county and that it's up to the county to ask the state for help. He says if the state EOC isn't fully activated,
you wouldn't have all the resources at your disposal.
Claremont says if the county doesn't request the state's assistance but is aware an emergency is unfolding, the state should immediately get in contact with the county's emergency officials to make sure they've got the situation under control.
That's very appropriate. The state maintains what's called a state warning point, and that's a 24/7 operation within HIEMA. And their job is to be aware, situationally aware of what's going on all over the state. They're watching TV, they're watching your news services, they're watching social media. And if they see something emerging, it is part of their job to reach out and say, hey, what are you going to need from us?
The state confirms Barros, along with his executive officer and operations branch chief, were in the state warning point that evening, while the resilience branch chief and communications director worked remotely. We also confirmed there is no state-level plan on how to respond to a wildfire, only a general all-hazard plan. Claremont said that could have contributed to what appears to have been a wait-and-see approach from the state.
You know, one of the other things that we're hearing reports of is just the confusion and panic during that time from residents who felt like the roadblocks that had been set up by MPD during those times to help funnel people in a different direction, and many going into Front Street area. Knowing what you know now, do you believe that that was the right move to funnel people in? And I know it's difficult because there's an investigation that's continued to go on.
Yeah.
But how do you respond to those who say that, that the roadblocks may have also played a part in some of the pandemonium that existed during that time?
I think everybody in the field were doing their best to save lives. Every single person in there did whatever they did in what they thought was saving a life. This was such a fluid and dynamic situation to know that a road is clear 1 second and then there's a tree on it the next second, or a pole. And they say, well, I thought you told me it was clear and now it's not clear. And then other places that I know people, there were heroic acts of people during that time. If we're going to ask this question, it's probably going to be at what moment in time, what part, where were we? Because there was so much happening around there, as far as I can tell, what was going on. But I'm confident that everybody had tried their best, whether they were the firefighters, the citizens. There were citizens who were helping each other. Traffic, I don't know that anything was a roadblock as much as it was a sort of I want to say a checkpoint or an area saying, just so you know, this is what's ahead, or you may not want to go this way, you may want to go that way. Those decisions were made in a split second. I think we know a lot more now than we did then. But while it was happening, which is what I think we should judge people's conduct on, is as it was happening. I'm very happy that we have an after-action report being done by the police department, being done by the fire department, and of course by agencies including Congress. And so that's what should happen in some way. This should never happen again. And so we should absolutely find out where all the areas that we can improve in and how that can happen.
Yeah, one of those areas that has received a lot of scrutiny is the decision not to sound those sirens. Herman Andaya in that press conference stood by that decision. We heard the governor saying that he wishes the sirens would have been sounded. Did Mr. Andaya discuss that decision with you before he talked publicly about it in the press conference? And do you agree with that decision?
I wish we had done everything within our power to let people know what was happening. I don't speak for Herman Andaya, and I mean, he is free to state his opinion about what decision was made and whether he supports that decision. That wasn't something we talked about. I'm not sure if he was expecting to be asked that question or not, but that was the answer he gave, and so be that. But if you're asking me, the mayors and the governor, we've met since this has happened, and we've already implemented new policies and responses to that. Now, previous to that, if you talk to someone like Darryl Oliveira, who was a fire chief as well as the head of the civil defense over on the Big Island, he would tell you that in every wildfire he had ever been in, they had never sounded an alarm in his experience. So, past practice being whatever it was, policies that are written, whether people follow them or not, I think what's important now going forward is for people to know that we will do everything we can to make sure that our people are